Last time on the History of Shonen Jump, we plunged into the beginning of its Dark Age. Bigger works began to end, and the newer manga on offer throughout 1995 wouldn't match the performance of the golden decade prior. The magazine would continue on declining in circulation, but by no means was Jump in a poor position or dying out for good, as 1996 would provide us with a few seeds which would help change its fate considerably. Still, for the dramatic effect, let us keep going through Shonen Jump's Dark Age and see what new series this year has in store for us.
It's time to duel!
With almost perfect timing, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5 Golden Wind would start in the final issue of 1995, meaning almost all of its initial chapters were serialized in 1996. Why I think this is so fitting is because of how different Part 5 feels to its previous parts, often being singled out as the black sheep or darkest part of the series. Whether you agree with this or not, the fact that we begin our story with the introduction of Giorno Giovanna, the son of Dio, definitely makes for a big first impression and adds to the feeling of exploring something darker. Despite the circumstances of his birth, or perhaps because of them, Giorno to me feels like one of the most outwardly good JoJo protagonists we've had since Jonathan. Granted, he is trying to become a criminal boss, but his reasons for doing so are quite pure, and he's a force consistently promoting good. His stand gold experience also feeds into his innate goodness, being themed around nature and giving him the ability to create and manipulate life itself. Christ parallels are abound. He is a character much like Josuke I didn't feel I quite got the first time I read or watched through JoJo, but even in these first 50 chapters I can safely say I like Giorno a lot more now. He's a lot of fun, as is the rest of Part 5's cast, and I'm excited to talk about all of them as we run through Golden Wind in the next few videos. In a very smart move, Part 5 opens up with a familiar character, Koichi from Part 4, going to investigate Giorno on Jotaro's behalf. It eases us into a brand new set of characters, a brand new and less confined setting compared to Morio, being a large swath of Italy, and these chapters also set up the crime drama elements which will gradually unfold throughout the part. We're not only dealing with your usual gangsters though, but ones with stands. Bruno Bucciarati and his stand Sticky Fingers is our first main fight and introduction to this, and it's delightfully JoJo, housing one of the most iconic scenes of the series where he licks Giorno since he can taste people who lie. While I think the actual setup to get Bruno on Giorno's side is a bit clunky, the characters themselves, their abilities and sense of style make up for any of that. Giorno, with some pretty busted Golden Wind abilities, manages to outfox Bruno, and his I have a dream speech manages to sway him somewhat in wanting to reform Passione, the gang Bruno belongs to. And this kickstarts the core of the story. Before we move on to meet the rest of the cast though, we have a quick arc involving Pulpo and his stand Black Sabbath. This is another really cool fight with a stand that has one of the coolest designs of the series. Koichi comes back here, and Giorno having to protect this lighter in these absolutely crazy ways, like by turning a light fixture into a snake, is peak JoJo bizarreness. You just can't explain that to someone who hasn't read JoJo, they'll look at you like you're crazy or something. The best part of this arc though is how it builds up Giorno and shows how righteous he is, firmly belonging to the Jo-style lineage and taking more from Jonathan than Dio in all honesty, which makes sense considering that's kind of who he's from. The duality of Giorno in between Jonathan and Dio is something I might make a point of as we go through this part more and more. Even if you don't vibe with Giorno at this point though, it's fine, as after Pulpo kills himself with a gun disguised as a banana, we're introduced to a delightful cast of characters who one by one get an arc focused on them to round out 1996. Soft Machine sees the crew take a boat to the island of Capri where they're taken out one by one, and here perhaps my favourite JoJo character ever, Leone Baccio, takes centre stage with his own stand Moody Blues. Abaccio's inclusion is great. He builds tension within the cast because he simply doesn't trust Giorno yet, and while he's quite aggressive, I don't find that it's overdone or annoying. Mister and Giorno then act as an assault team to take out another rival gangster after Pulpo's fortune, which leads to the introduction of his stand Sex Pistols. Part 5 has some very creative and different stands, and this is definitely one of them, being a set of 6 sentient little guys who kick around any bullets Mr. shoots, which is a very fun ability that's well demonstrated through his fight against Kraftwerk. There's more than just treasure on Capri though, as Bruno uses it to buy himself the rank of Capo, and they instantly get a very dangerous task: to safeguard the boss's daughter, Trish Una. She won't come into play much in 1996, but her presence brings with it a whole host of gangsters who would want to get at her to also take out the boss for their own reasons. All of this is an excellent excuse for even more stand battles with superpowered gangsters. While the crew work out what to do next, they lay low with Trish, banking on Narancha to go get them groceries, which seems like a really bad idea, as so far he's demonstrated that he's kind of dumb and not very inconspicuous. Sorry, little guy. Bruno has faith in him though, due to his stand ability, Aerosmith. This is literally just a miniature plane with real guns. It's a pretty crazy ability, and one touch I really love is how Narancha's arms act as a runway for it, which leads to some very sick poses from him. A core thread so far throughout these arcs is learning about the cast and how they connect with each other, mostly to Bruno though, who has pretty much adopted them all into his crew. His faith in his allies is made out to be a big point, and something very relevant to the next arc, as everyone's faith in Giorno is gradually tested as the resident newbie. Hibachio has demonstrated a distrust and disrespect to him, so it's time to rectify that with the help of Fugo and his stand Purple Haze. Here the crew is sent a message by the boss to get a key from Pompeii, but of course it's guarded by a dastardly stand, Man in the Mirror, who can drag people into its mirror world. Purple Haze might be the biggest threat though, playing off of Fugo's anger issues. It too is prone to wild bursts of anger like himself, and the virus the stand houses is deathly to all living things. Giorno uses this fact with some clever applications of gold experience to bring this infection to the stand user of Man in the Mirror, Lucio, though Giorno gets infected in the process too. While he does figure out how to get a vaccine for this infection, the fact that he risked his life not only to get the key they needed, but to save one of his new squadmates too, starts to shift Hibachio and the others' perception of him. So much happens throughout Part 5, and I really like how many different places we've visited already. We've gone to Capri and Pompeii, but the real highlight of Part 5 so far is its characters and the interactions they have with each other. In particular, I really like how it follows this cast of young teens as they descend into the Italian underworld. There's an angst to that which separates Golden Wind from other parts and makes it feel a bit more unique, and scenes like the backstory involving Sorbet and Gelato, as well as everyone's backstories generally, interweave elements of tragedy into Part 5 that I feel are a little bit more pointed than other parts. As we progress through the next few years of Jump, I'll be sure to touch on this quality and the overall tone of Part 5 a bit more. It gets brooding and melancholy in all the right ways as it grapples with its theme of fate and how some are bound to follow its whims to the grave. For now though, let's briefly go over some supplemental media regarding the part. Of course, Part 5, like prior parts, would receive an anime adaptation by David Production, but additionally, I want to bring up Part 5 having a bunch of pretty famous fan animations. This one fan-made OP being really well made, and it's something that's been stuck in my mind for a good decade or so. It's a bit of a pain to fully track down, especially since Nico Nico has gone and geo-locked itself, which is apparently where this might have originated from sometime in 2007. What I can tell you about it though is that it's a parody of the opening of Sorcery Hunters, something that was released during early 1996. I would have loved to give a name to whoever made this alongside some other JoJo fan OPs which I think were done by the same person, but my time is kind of limited and there's an idea for someone else if you'd like an internet scavenger hunt. It's a bit of a weird thing to bring up in context since none of this came out in 1996, but I always find it very interesting to see older fan culture being represented, and it's something cool to bring up if you're not familiar with these things. Another piece of Part 5 media you might not be familiar with is the PS2 game it got, entitled JoJo's Bizarre Adventure with 2 Gs, and it's an adventure action game by Capcom that was released in 2002, post the part ending. While it was originally only released in Japanese, there is an English fan patch out there if you'd like to play it. Part 5 would span a few years, and like the other JoJo parts, we'll get back to it and discuss what arcs appeared as they go by, as well as some additional bonus media that I feel would make sense to talk about as we get further into the story, like Part 5's light novels. Let's check back in with our little gangster squad next year though, and for now we'll move on to some other manga that came out within Jump in 1996. Debuting early on in the year, we'd have a big hit which is seldom discussed outside of Japan, Wild Half by Yuko Asami, which ran for 142 chapters and 17 volumes. Keeping Jump's tradition of having dog protagonists like Ginga, Wild Half is a story that focuses on a human and dog duo, Takuto Iwase and Salsa. Salsa isn't your normal dog though, he is a type of beast man with the power to transform into a hybrid form between human and animal. The series would use this to conduct battles, but primarily it would be a detective focused series, with the titular Wild Half being Salsa's alias, which he uses to help people from the shadows in his dog form. Over the course of the series, more Wild Halves or Beastmen get introduced, and the series would continue to juggle its battle, mystery, and slice of life elements, though unfortunately only 5 chapters are available to be read in English. Despite its popularity and cult status, the author Yuko Asami wouldn't have a very long career within Jump, becoming a doujinshi artist in the years since the series' conclusion. I bring this up because at least one major doujin of Wild Half has been created by them, Wild Half Kiba-kun no Hanashi, which seems to feature this pretty popular leopard character. Outside of this, Wild Half received 3 drama CDs throughout 1997 to 1998, and throughout 2014 to 2015, the stage play Wild Half Probability of Miracles was performed about a dozen times. For whatever reason, I find it really fascinating that older Jump properties often get musicals like this, like with Outer Zone a few videos ago. Like that stage play, we have some accounts from the actors we can look at, namely the actor Kohei Murakami, who played Hisafumi Iwase, the main character's brother. It seems to be very common for stage actors to have these little blogs where they gush about the plays they were a part of, especially after they conclude, and there's something very nice about that. I'm at least thankful we can get a glimpse of the behind the scenes of this, and we have some more too, as the stage play has its own YouTube channel which has videos of a few actors introducing themselves and their roles. I'll link Kohei Murakami's blog and this channel in the description if you're at all curious about the Wild Half stage play. Oni ga Kitarite would be a demon-focused battle manga that would last 13 chapters and 2 volumes by Gin Shinga. Following Raya Onibe, a feared member of the Onibe clan, the story would be set in the early Edo period and see him hunt down various evil demons who have gone astray. There was a focus on a few different clans of demons with relations to each other, and the final villain was the main character's father, but it was cancelled so quickly that not much of this was actually explored in the story, which was only heightened by its slower pace. As a side note, I believe this is the first assistant of Nobuhiro Watsuki to get their own series, although Oni ga Kitarite seemed to follow a similar formula to Rurouni Kenshin, which likely didn't help its chances in sticking around. Makuhari would last 82 chapters and 9 volumes by Yasuaki Kita, being another cult hit of the year and a gag manga which poked fun at the magazine through fourth wall breaking parody, much like the Me and Roboko of today or Gintama. Makuhari would primarily follow the dynamic duo of Tetsuhito Shioda and Shigeo Nara, 2 high schoolers and members of the school's baseball club, though no baseball is ever played within the manga. As mentioned, a large amount of jokes would be referential and parody real-world things, mainly Jump manga, mangaka, editors, and celebrities. These jokes would often be far more mean-spirited, I think, than what you might see in other Jump gag manga, and alongside this, Makuhari would put a big focus on raunchy or sexual humor. I can't speak for the entire series since it isn't translated, but the first 3 chapters didn't serve to be a very compelling introduction to me. Initially, there's some great jokes poking fun at Jump in a light way. It's referential and clever, but then it devolves into some pretty rough homophobic stuff, and chapter 2 sees the main characters get way too handsy with a girl. I just don't think it holds up very well and wasn't what I expected at all. Me throwing "it doesn't hold up" might elicit a no shit moment from you, but at least in this case I'm partly bringing it up because it's especially related to its time. Many jokes centered around things like making fun of other Jump manga we'll discuss this year, like psychological profiler Aoi Kusanagi, which did not run past 1996. Stay tuned if you want to learn more about that. Kita would parody this series, and in turn the creators of Aoi Kusanagi would feature a murder victim after Yasuaki Kita, though through Jump author comments it seems nobody was actually angry at any of this and it was just friendly banter. Makuhari's banter wouldn't always get a pass though, as at one point it would make fun of a specific comedian, only for those chapters to never appear in its volume release, likely because the comedian complained and asked for them to be removed. Another aspect that firmly rooted Makuhari in the time of its serialization was its ending, featuring a joke that another author, Hiroshi Gamo of Lucky Man fame, was actually the protagonist of the series. And in an odd move for Jump, many of Makuhari's covers featured some kind of models, which is quite rare for the magazine. Jump almost always features its own series on the cover, but other rival magazines like Weekly Shonen Magazine or Sunday will have various idols or models with gravure features inside. Perhaps this was a request by Kita and Jump went along with it, as they were trying a lot of new things in this period anyway. From my perspective of going through all of Jump and seeing all of its covers pretty much, it is always a bit weird when you see real people on them, especially women in scantily clad clothing. Makuhari is a pretty bizarre series from Jump. It's one that caused a hefty amount of controversy in its time, and seemed to be favoured by editorial. It was also used as a gateway to introduce new aspects to the magazine, like a focus on celebrities, current events, and models, but due to it being firmly rooted in Japanese culture at the time, it's something a bit hard to get a grasp of now. That being said, it's also something perfect to discuss in these history videos, as it's a time capsule of a manga that gives us a glimpse into the wider world of Jump at the time, so it was pretty fascinating to look into. Shinko Endan Shinshiroku by Yasuteru Iwata would last 17 chapters in 2 volumes and be a delinquent cheerleading manga. Not something I ever expected to see in Jump, quite frankly. While this sounds like the setup for a light-hearted and wacky gag manga, and by no means is it not that, surprisingly it seems to take itself quite seriously, perhaps aided by its cast's stoic, delinquent demeanors and the artwork featuring some very gruff faces. In that regard, it reminds me of the works of Akira Miyashita like Sakigake Otokojuku. Initially, cheerleading seems to be a gateway for boys to meet with and date girls, but the third year's cheerleaders inspire our set of protagonists, and they persevere through the grueling training in order to become proud cheer squad members. Perhaps it's because the premise was a bit too odd, or due to delinquents gradually falling out of popularity, Shinko Endan Shinshiroku would meet a pretty quick end midway through the year. Continuing our String of Acts series from 1996, we have Diamond, lasting 17 chapters and 2 volumes by Yoshihiro Yanagawa. This would be a boxing manga following Tomoya Yamamoto, a high schooler with no prospects, dreams or goals, who one day meets a boxer jogging, who inspires him to pick up the sport. Diamond was characterized by being introspective, which I think comes across well in Yanagawa's artwork. The facial expressions and overall page composition conveys a listlessness that fits the premise well, but perhaps with a slower beginning and a quieter story, this wasn't the best fit for Jump, even in this experimental period. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have another boxing manga, also lasting 17 chapters and 2 volumes, K.O Masatome by Tatsunosuke Sonoda. If Diamond was something pensive with a focus on internal character exploration, K.O Masatome is its direct opposite, being a silly explosive gag manga about a children's boxing club. It followed Masatome and friends goofing off, with the series being filled with all sorts of slapstick, dirty jokes, and referential humor. I find it pretty interesting that Jump would release 2 boxing manga back to back like this, even if they were pretty different, but it does go to show how popular the sport was, and perhaps with them knowing that Rokutenashi Blues was approaching its end, they wanted to find a new hit involving boxing. Sadly, neither of these would make it out of 1996. This next series would finally spell some good news for Jump, becoming a big hit at the time from a beloved rookie mangaka, Ryu Fujisaki. Of course, we're talking about Hoshin Engi, which would last 206 chapters and 23 volumes, being a pivotal force that aided Jump in one of its darkest times. Debuting in the issue after Slam Dunk would end, Hoshin Engi had some big shoes to fill. Fujisaki's previous series, Psycho Plus, met with a blisteringly quick cancellation, and while his weird one-shots and experimental style was praised, the question remained, could Fujisaki create a sustainable hit for Jump that wouldn't alienate its readership? Hoshin Engi managed to achieve this, and in a fascinating way that relates back to the biggest hit Jump had ever had, Dragon Ball. This series, like Dragon Ball, would be based on one of the great classic Chinese novels. Dragon Ball was of course riffing on Journey to the West, but we also have stories like Suikoden or Water Margin, which you might be familiar with. This also has a Jump adaptation, but we won't be talking about that for a very long time. Hoshin Engi is based on a story called Investiture of the Gods, or the Japanese novelization of it by Tsutomu Anno. I think there's some logic in thinking, well, if it worked for Dragon Ball, why not try something similar again? And paired with Ryu Fujisaki's own individual flair, it ended up succeeding. Hoshin Engi follows Taikobo in a world that mixes ancient China with high-tech sci-fi visuals, structures, and weaponry, giving it a unique vibe suitable for something made by Fujisaki. Here, humankind lives alongside the immortal Sennin, basically a kind of godlike equivalent, those who have attained immortality and possess a myriad of unique powers. Initially, Taikobo is tasked with sealing many of the Sennin who inhabit the human world through the Hoshin Project, and part of this is about taking down the nefarious Daki, who has usurped the throne of Yin through her cunning plans and seduction of its king. The integration of myth and legend is felt really strongly in Hoshin Engi's initial chapters. While reading, there's a level of randomness that's inherent with older folkloric stories. It's as if pieces are missing or the way people write was just different. I'm basing this off of my own readings of folklore, mainly of the Welsh Mabinogion, so I could be entirely off base here. But what this does is it gives Hoshin Engi a very unique vibe that's appropriate for its setting and what it's drawing from. It really does feel like you're reading some mythological scriptures or folklore stories. As the story progresses though, the depth of the characters expand and it becomes more of your usual battle shonen, though it has a focus on strategy and outwitting your opponent. Both Daki and Taikobo are smart, and the series goes to great lengths to show how. A lot of big moves are made that involve entire countries or large armies. Gathering allies is also a pivotal part of Hoshin Engi, and unlike a lot of other series where the main characters will wander around with a group of friends, in this case Taikobo often recruits people who will show up again way later, and you won't see them for a long time as they just train in the background. As much as Hoshin Engi can feel like your typical battle shonen, it does enough differently that it feels very fresh and unique. All of this build-up in the first half of the story, where the characters are developed and allies are gathered, pays off immensely as stakes rise during its later arcs, and it honestly became one of the most gripping Jump manga I've ever read during its climax. What Hoshin Engi has to say about topics like conflict end up hitting really hard, and I think it has one of the best commentaries on the nature of violence that I've seen from a piece of media, at least within Jump. Taikobo is constantly trying to find options which avoid direct combat. He wants to save people, with an emphasis on people as in humans, which leads into some of the other things Hoshin Engi explores. The gods throughout the series are constantly meddling in the affairs of humans and the world at large. They often come across like they know better, but a big part of the series is them learning to step back, or Taikobo trying to reach a state where humanity gets its chance to do its own thing in its own way. And a lot of that is about having faith in humanity to do the right things, with it pushing a message that we should all try our best to live good lives and don't abuse the planet, in the hopes that future generations will do the same. It's about having faith in people, even if you know that in the end bad things will still happen, cycles will still repeat, and the manga itself is still self-aware about this in one of my favourite moments. But the optimism it presents and its belief in the future of humanity is something very important, and I think very core to a good Shonen Jump manga. Nothing good will happen if we don't believe in it or pursue it. Alongside this, it also explores how bad absolute control is by others, be they rulers, tyrants, or gods. One person controlling the fate of an entire country or civilization is not the way, and I think doing this through a story about the era of gods and myths ending is approached fantastically. Hoshin Engi isn't all seriousness though, as it's also incredibly funny and in its own Fujisaki branded way, heavily utilizing meta humor and fourth wall breaks, which at least for me works really well as they were present throughout the entire story and didn't detract from anything. This feeds into the art too, that likes to get experimental or feed into gags now and again, like the time it mimics a fighting game, or in perhaps my favourite moment in the entire series, the time the series fakes its own ending and becomes a brand new manga for at least a few pages. Nobody quite does it like Fujisaki. What he makes is bizarre and special. This is so apparent just from looking at how he draws. His characters have these big shiny eyes, reminiscent of popular 90s anime. I just think of Slayers or something when I see them. They are also clad in lavish clothing and have intricate machine-like giant boots or other elements to their designs that add a ton to the manga's setting and aesthetic. The way he colours too is beautiful. It's ethereal and spiritual even, but then it's mixed with the technology and machinery in a way you think would clash, but it doesn't. I think the incorporation of some of the technological elements is really interesting, and it reminds me of Evangelion in a way, though it's approached in its own way by melding it in with these ancient Chinese aesthetics as well. And while we're on the subject of art, I have to talk about Daki, who is one of the most stylish and attractive characters ever, who Fujisaki gives a new outfit to almost every time you meet her, and she slays every single time. I'm really surprised actually that people don't bring her up as much. She's one of Shonen Jump's coolest antagonists, a female villain and pro-manipulator, girl boss extraordinaire, over 2 decades before the likes of Makima from Chainsaw Man. How she feeds into the ending also solidified her as one of my favourite characters perhaps ever. Also, shout out to Fugen Shinjin, who also has a killer design, and I love them to bits too. The general cast of Hoshin Engi is great all around, and there's so many characters to pick and choose from for your favourites. They're all very likeable. As you can probably tell, I really love Hoshin Engi. It was a lot of fun to read, even though it took me quite a long time, as it's pretty wordy, and just look at this glossary page at the back of its volumes. There's a lot of specific language related to its story that's quite hard to grasp sometimes. So with that, I recognize it might not be for everyone, especially if you struggle with something like dyslexia. It was a bit tough for me to read with all of these names and phrases and different words for different types of characters or roles they had. It's dense ultimately, but if you can power through that, there's a lot to love here. In its heyday, it was a story that captured the people of the time by doing something familiar in a different way. Looping back to what I said in the beginning, just like Dragon Ball, it approached a classic story but supercharged it with the author's own sense of style and interests. It may not be as universally beloved or approachable as Dragon Ball, but it's certainly special and a good representative for this era of Shonen Jump, which was constantly trying to find itself again after the Golden Age. We're not quite done with Hoshin Engi yet though, as it would receive a lot of love outside of the original manga, including 2 anime adaptations. The first, dubbed Soul Hunter in English, ran for 26 episodes in 1999, and the second, more recent, Hakyu Hoshin Engi, ran for 23 episodes in 2018. The latter I've only ever heard bad things about, since it rushes through the story at an unprecedented rate, and overall I feel like without a substantial amount of episodes, Hoshin Engi just might be a hard thing to adapt in general. It also received multiple video game adaptations. 2 for the Wonder Swan, an adorable little thing that never left Japan. The PS1 and Game Boy Color also got Hoshin Engi games too, and it's fitting since Fujisaki is very vocal about loving video games in all of his author comments. To coincide with the new 2018 anime, more Hoshin Engi was also created by Fujisaki, serialized in Young Jump for 7 chapters entitled Hoshin Engi Gaiden. Some of this has been translated into English, but it's incomplete and mostly acts as a little side story after the manga's ending. Much like Wild Half, which we discussed earlier, Hoshin Engi was also subject to getting a musical stage play adaptation which occurred throughout 2019 to 2020. There were 2 separate plays from what I could tell, but it seems like the pandemic might have affected any prolonged success. The costuming and casting look great though, and there will be a link to its website in the description if you'd like to look at it a little bit more. Doruhira would last 14 chapters and 2 volumes by Shuto Hori, being another new sports manga but on a less popular one than boxing: swimming. The setup involves Ryuji, a practitioner of judo, falling in love with his classmate Naomi, who's part of the swimming team in their school. So, in order to get closer to her, he joins the swim team without even being able to swim, and shenanigans ensue. It juggled romantic comedy elements alongside sports aspects, but didn't seem to captivate readers with any of this, leading to a very quick cancellation. There have been rumours, due to the series' drastic change in character designs, that the author gave up and their assistants finished the manga, but like with all rumours like this, take them with the tiniest grain of salt, as I don't think it's true and it's quite disrespectful to propose. Psychological profiler Aoi Kusanagi would last 23 chapters in 3 volumes by Shin Kisumi, Kenichiro Nakamura, and Kaoru Tsukishima. As the title suggests, this is a mystery detective work with a focus on criminal profiling that sees its protagonist Kusanagi Aoi take out ne'er-do-wells with deductive reasoning and psychological tricks. From what I could find, the final case even involves a cyber killer who utilizes the internet to aid him or announce when murders will happen. Something worth mentioning, as in this time the internet would be something you'd see more and more of in works. It's actually brought up a bunch by Ryuji Fujisaki in Hoshin Engi's afterwards too. Like I mentioned in the last video, detective media had become exceptionally popular at the time, and it seems Jump was still aiming to get a hit akin to Shonen Sunday's Detective Conan, but alas, this would not be it.
許せぬ悪をゲームバトルでぶちのめす究極のゲームアクション新番組遊戯王4月4日土曜夕方6時スタートゲームの時間だ
While Jump might have been struggling through trying to make a hit series chasing popular topics at the time, an unexpected hit would come from another relative newcomer. Ryuji Fujisaki had some acclaim to his name, and Hoshin Engi would certainly shape up to become a big hit, but 1986 would see another manga explode in popularity, focusing on slice-of-life school elements and supernatural shadow games. I'm of course talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! By Kazuki Takahashi, lasting 343 chapters and 38 volumes, meaning it ran well into the new millennium. Despite only a handful of chapters actually coming out in 1996, Yu-Gi-Oh! Managed to get its second Shonen Jump cover by the end of the year at chapter 10, which is a feat not many manga achieve, and it also beat Hoshin Engi to its second cover, though that series would get many covers following this too. I don't really want to pit them up against each other, but more so what I'm trying to do here is to tell you that both of these were extremely popular new additions to Shonen Jump. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is such an odd series to discuss, since many people who aren't too deep into the anime manga sphere might assume it originated as a card game or anime, the 4Kids dub being the most popular thing in the West, but it all began in Weekly Shonen Jump, and what's more, the card game aspect wasn't the original focus. Much of manga Yu-Gi-Oh! Will be familiar to you though if you are a fan of the popular anime, as its core is a story about a boy wishing for friends and the games he plays with them. Plus, there's a lot of dark supernatural stuff too. If you've watched other history videos, you'll know I tackle some series in pieces, usually the popular ones like Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, and JoJo. The series people are most familiar with, which ran for a long time and are separated into arcs. I find this gives a sense of place to the different eras of time if you know when different arcs took place. So with Dragon Ball, you could work out when the Cell Saga was going on and what other manga were in Jump at the time. Similarly, if you're a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! Later on, you'll figure out what manga were going on while Battle City was taking place or whatever like that. So that's partially why I do this. Another reason why I'm going to specifically do it with Yu-Gi-Oh! Though is because I absolutely love it and it might be my favorite manga ever. And because of that, I have a lot to say about it, so if I don't talk about an aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh! Today that you're familiar with, or I don't go too deep into its spin-offs, its card game or different anime, rest assured we will get to those aspects eventually. For now though, let's discuss the very beginning of the series, which sees Yukimoto trying to build the Millennium Puzzle, a keepsake from his grandpa who runs a game shop, with games being the primary focus of the series. I'm sure I'll yap about the importance of games as long as Yu-Gi-Oh is present in these videos, but it's so integral to Yu-Gi-Oh's DNA as a series. From its initial setting, the name of the city, Domino City, the extra little mazes, spot the differences, and games Takahashi peppers into bonus pages, games are everywhere in the series. To Yugi as well, games are something he deeply loves, and a part of this is because they're activities you can do with friends, to have fun with and bond over, and friends are something he desperately wants, but he's so small and meek and has trouble making them. Yu-Gi-Oh also has an initial focus on bullying as well. Yugi gets bullied by Jonoichi or Joey Wheeler, as well as Honda, Tristan. I grew up with the 4Kids dub, so I'm going to be using their Western names since that's how I remember these characters, though the first time I mention these characters I'll bring up both, like how Taya Gardner is also named Anzu Mazaki, Yugi's childhood friend and love interest who stands up for him here and there. The focus initially though is on Yugi and his relationship with Joey, who ends up stealing a piece of the Millennium Puzzle to mess with him. Yugi building the puzzle but realizing he can't finish it, only to lament that his dream of finding friends will never come true, is really soul crushing in chapter 1, but then you get Joey returning that piece and this act cements their friendship. Why he did this in the first place and change his bullying ways is because of Yugi's actions. Standing up for him even though he's far smaller and weaker than Joey, calling him a friend despite how Joey has treated him. Yugi is such a lovely and sweet character, and this is apparent from the very beginning of the series. Usually I don't go crazy in depth with the manga I cover in the history series, but I find Yu-Gi-Oh as a work is well loved, but people don't acknowledge how good and impactful it actually is. It's more than a hyper-serious supernatural card battler, and might be one of the strongest showings of a narrative focusing on friendships ever written. So I want to lay the groundwork for people to understand that through these videos. Plus, I think it helps illuminate why people in Japan were so invested in Yu-Gi-Oh even early on. The characters were always likable and you wanted to root for Yugi. I think the bullying aspects were important too. As I mentioned in my previous video with Genki Yade, a short manga about real life bullying, it was a very important topic at the time. Bullying was rampant in the 90s as it was in most other times, but there seemed to be a big push at the time to help children suffering from it. So not only would Yu-Gi-Oh be a nice series to have on paper within the magazine, it would look good in helping Jump's image, but children and young adults might resonate with a character who's experienced similar things and would get the catharsis when he overcomes his bullies. And in a really cool way, Kazuki Takahashi manages to integrate the aspect of gaming with this aspect of bullying by seeing Yugi beat all of his bullies through games. After fully completing the Millennium Puzzle, Yugi now gets periodically possessed by the pharaoh housed inside, something we're not privy to yet, so he mainly comes across as Yami Yugi or Dark Yugi early on. When Yugi or his friends are in a spot of trouble, he'll transform and initiate a shadow game with his adversaries, which sets up Yu-Gi-Oh's initial formula. Someone gets bullied or some antagonist is going to do something bad, Yugi challenges them to a game which often feeds into their flaw or sin they're about to commit, and Yugi craftily beats them or they cheat. In the first chapter, it revolves around Ushio extorting Yugi for money, so they play a game where they have to pick yen bills up with a knife on their hands. Ushio ends up cheating and now is doomed to see leaves as the money he craves. It's a fitting punishment for someone who is over-focused on money and is greedy. 1996 sees a bunch of episodic chapters like this. Yugi fights a corrupt filmmaker with a dice game, leading to his site being mosaicked. He then burns a criminal alive with a clever game involving both of them only being able to use one finger, and he sends an explosive to a bully through a game of ice hockey played on a hot griddle. These are all inventive scenarios focused on little games that don't last long. They all feed into the evils the characters commit and are satisfying when Yugi beats them, although a lot of them are quite brutal. Some scenarios are a bit less game-like, but the message they convey is nice and the tone is still there. It's also pretty dark, aided by Takahashi's art, with Yami-Yuki's expressions being particularly impish. On the subject of art though, let's talk about that briefly since it's very different from Takahashi's later style. Characters here are less unified, they're a bit blobbier, and the eyes Takahashi would be known for haven't quite manifested yet. I really love this art style though, it's so expressive and all the characters feel a bit off, which really adds to the series' slightly creepy vibe. They're also cute in their own way too, especially Yugi, and I think that meshes with the slice of life school setting well. Much of what I've discussed might sound very different if you're familiar with just the core card game aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh!, but worry not, as 1996 ends with Yu-Gi-Oh!'s first multi-chapter story, The Cards with Teeth, which initially acted as a parody on Magic the Gathering, though this card game that Takahashi concocted as a substitute would go on to become Duel Monsters itself. We're quite a ways away from that becoming the focus of the series, but this story sees the game's introduction, as well as set up Kaiba and Grandpa's precious Blue Eyes White Dragon for the very first time. Something I want to touch on here is how people will often discuss Yu-Gi-Oh! And a lot of conversation around it is very segmented, I think. I'll often see people focused on liking the card game arcs more, or people saying the original few arcs or Season 0, which we'll get to later, is better or somehow separate. But I think all of this is Yu-Gi-Oh! And I love it holistically. The Cards with Teeth is a good example of this. It features the same formula, characters, and art as the previous few episodic ones, but there is something undeniably special when these cards show up. Maybe it's nostalgia or the way Takahashi draws the cards themselves, they just look excellent as part of his page layout. The designs of the cards as well are simple and the art is striking and creepy. The introduction of Duel Monsters gives us our first larger game too. It's not something just concocted by Yugi on the spot. There's deeper rules and a sense of individuality to what cards you choose and use. In this arc you also get to see Yugi and friends crowd around school tables, playing the game and having fun. Everything that makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Special is here in spades. I think the illustrations overall take a big leap here too, as the already appealing art of Takahashi is complemented by his great monster designs, many of which are still highly iconic cards like Battle Ox, Summon Skull, Mystical Elf, and of course Blue Eyes White Dragon. I think Yami Yugi is also solidified a bit more here too. He's a little less impish, and the way he goes about punishing Kaiba while uplifting Yugi and Grandpa's values feels a lot less sinister. There's a focus at the end that Kaiba has to experience death, but only an illusory version, in the hopes that he understands why the cards he plays with and the game itself are special to him and everyone else. There's a weird kindness in that, at least to me, and there's a focus here on loving games, which is what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is all about. I think that's the perfect way to set Yu-Gi-Oh! Up. All the pieces of the puzzle feel like they've fallen into place, and I've gotten to talk about the core of the series. So next time we can focus on how things evolve. Before we end with Yu-Gi-Oh! For this video though, I do want to bring up some supplemental media and adaptations. By this point, it's way too early for Yu-Gi-Oh! To have gotten anything, be it cards, video games, spin-offs, or anime, but I do think mentioning Yu-Gi-Oh!'s first anime right now is a good idea. Before the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime most of us know and love, done by Studio Gallop, there was a version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Produced in 1998 by Toei Animation, lasting 27 episodes that focused on adapting Yu-Gi-Oh!'s earlier chapters prior to Duelist Kingdom. Affectionately, this is known as Season 0. There's some filler pertaining to the various shadow games, and notably, Miho Nosaka is given a much bigger presence, whereas she's only really around for one chapter in the manga. It's an interesting relic of Yu-Gi-Oh! That not everyone is aware of, so here you go. If you want to watch a different version of Yu-Gi-Oh!, you can. While looking into this as well, I found there's a partial fan dub for it by Team Millennium Productions, which I think is very cool, and it's still an active project that they're working on, so if this is something you like the sound of, please check it out. I adore Yu-Gi-Oh!, so seeing people still passionately engage with the series in any way fills me with an immense amount of joy. And with that being said, if you've never read Yu-Gi-Oh! And consider yourself a fan of Shonen Jump, please give it a shot. There's plenty there for you if you've seen the anime, and I promise it's one of the magazine's best manga ever, and I can't wait to talk about it more in the future with these history videos. Majokko Vivian would last 43 chapters and 4 volumes by Yutaka Takahashi, following the witch Vivian, who leaves her home, the island of Avalon, to get married to a Japanese high school boy named Ikkyu Akari. However, she doesn't leave alone, as her friend and fellow witch Arune follows suit, leading to the beginning of a magical rom-com of sorts. From what I can find, there's a lot of gags like in Yutaka Takahashi's prior series Bonbon Zaka, as well as romantic elements, but there's a greater focus on fantasy world building here, and at least a few pages of actual battles. So unlike Bonbon Zaka, it seemed to be a more well-rounded series focusing on a lot of different elements. There was plenty of comedy though, and a core gag of the series seems to stem from Vivian's high level of mana, which means she can cast all sorts of spells, but is really bad at controlling them. It just seems super endearing, whimsical, and a fun time overall. The art reflects this as well, with the character designs being some of my favourite from the period. In particular, I just want to bring up the covers, which all look beautiful. They're so colourful and have this peaceful feeling about them, which I just want others to see. This would be the final manga Yutaka Takahashi would release in Jump, with them having a pretty fruitful career with gag manga, and personally, despite my distaste for their prior series, this is a manga I would really like to read and see translated one day. Be Takuto by Takashi Noguchi would last 20 chapters in 2 volumes and would follow Takuto Yachio, a boy full of courage who loves motorcycles, with the manga featuring them prominently initially before moving on to karate, as well as peppering in 2 love interests for the main character, a karate teacher and their childhood friend. Like Noguchi's other work, it seems like they just threw everything they liked into a pot and prayed it would stick. And while this would last longer than usual for them, it would still get cancelled pretty quickly, with them leaving the magazine after 3 cancellations in total. Now, that's a bit of a dull way to end the year, but a few other events would occur throughout 1996 which I'll bring up, including Kochikame hitting its 1000th chapter, a pretty landmark moment for Shonen Jump. We haven't touched on Kochikame much since its debut, but it's still going strong at this point, and what's more, 1996 saw the debut of its anime too, which is pretty relevant to us right now, as that's getting an official English release by Remao, which if you're in North America at least, you can watch for free on their YouTube channel. I'll leave a link to that below. Sadly, if you're not from the US like me, you can't watch it, but hey, maybe one day they'll open that up so other people can see it too. Another huge event to occur in 1996 would be Slam Dunk Ending, seeing the match between Sano and Shohoku, which had been going on for multiple volumes, finally come to a climactic and absurdly well-drawn end. In one of the only instances ever, it would get the cover for its final chapter, as well as the entire chapter in full colour. While the full colour chapter treatment would happen again multiple times, only 3 Jump manga have ever ended with the cover. Those being the last 2 manga we talked about, Kochikame, which is way into the future, as well as Slam Dunk. The third is Yamazaki Ginjiro by Hiroshi Motomiya, which we discussed forever ago, and is more of a testament of how popular Motomiya was back then. Even though he'd left the magazine by this point, I still find ways to bring him up, which amazes me. He's such a cool figure in Jump's history. Speaking about cool figures in Jump's history, the final thing I want to bring up before we move on to our roster talk section is a change in editorial. This has happened numerous times throughout Jump's history, and I probably should have brought them up to be honest, but I just flat out lack knowledge and interest in this subject. But out of every single editor Jump's ever had, I'd wager the most well-known and perhaps most impactful was Kazuhiko Torishima, who would become the new editor-in-chief this year in 1996. Torishima's influences extend far beyond his editor-in-chief position and Jump overall, with him being very prolific throughout his entire life. Notably for us though, he's responsible for dragging Toriyama into Jump and served as his editor for a long period of time, with Dr. Slump even naming its villain, Dr. Mashirito, after him. He would go on to further influence the inner workings of Jump, helping bring more video game related elements to the magazine with the Famicom Shinken column, and was an important part in the initial creation of Dragon Quest. These experiences would aid Torishima in the near future, as he'd be put in charge of the creation of V-Jump, a sibling magazine to Shonen Jump with a focus on video games targeted at a younger audience, which is still running and is still successful to this day. It's a shoo-in that someone this innovative might make for a good editor-in-chief of the main magazine, and as it was struggling after losing some of its biggest hits, why not ask the person who was integral in bringing one of those big hits to Jump to help the magazine out in its time of need? Torishima would refuse for a while, but did capitulate, taking over the position of editor-in-chief in February of 1996, but what he would do was perhaps unexpected to everyone else. Torishima quickly realized that the current trajectory of Jump wasn't working, and with his knowledge of video games and media outside of manga, he knew that the magazine sales weren't everything, so there was a new focus on getting new series to a stage where anime, video games, and more could do some of the heavy lifting sales-wise. Another thing Torishima is known for is pushing away the old guard of Jump to focus on new authors, which will become more apparent as we continue throughout the 90s, but in this year alone we would see works by new authors which would explode. Ryo Fujisaki and Kazuki Takahashi would both skyrocket into popularity with their new series. He held the belief that Jump constantly circulating new blood with fresh and interesting ideas would be pivotal to the magazine's success, and he was right. Torishima isn't the sole reason Jump would claw its way out of this dark age. So many editors and authors of all these series played a big part too, but his leadership and decisions played a big role in shaping the Jump we know and love today. And as we'll come to see in the coming years, he would place it on a ship that would guide it safely into the new millennium. Honestly, I don't think I've done Torishima justice here. He's such a fascinating individual with a ton of history surrounding him, and while some of the things he says rubs me the wrong way and sounds overtly bureaucratic, I think it's evident that he loves manga and art because he's done so much to support the magazine, its artists, and the series they create. Now let's take a look at Jump at the beginning and end of 1996 to see how things changed throughout the year. At this point in time, Slam Dunk was still ruling the roost, but plenty of other classics still remained in the magazine, like Dragon Quest The Adventure of Dai, JoJo Now Part 5, Roku Danashi Blues, Hell Teacher Nube, Hallelujah 2 Boy, and some newer hits from last year in Rurouni Kenshin and Midori Makibao. Gag manga would forever be strong, with the never-ending Kochikame hitting its 1000th chapter at the very end of the year, but Sexy Commando Gaiden, Lucky Man, and Osama wa Roba offered a good variety for comedy as well. Majima-kun would fill in for combat sports, and Captain Tsubasa World Youth would still be there representing football, which leaves Hisoka Returns as the resident drama series of the magazine. We then have a few stragglers, series that would end soon, like Kappaman, Kyosu Kanburia, Ayatsuri Sakon, and Shadow Lady. Throughout the year, many series would end, including the 4 I just mentioned having fairly short runs. Hisoka Returns would also end sometime into the year, having fallen out of favour due to its shift to a more battle-focused formula. We then have 2 major conclusions this year in Slam Dunk and Dragon Quest The Adventure of Dai, which ended at the very end of the year. Other series were also setting up to end at this juncture, so it was pivotal that Jump find new successes quickly, and thankfully we'd get just that. Hoshin Engi and Yu-Gi-Oh! Would usher in the next generation, both belonging to newer artists who'd been cancelled once before. The stories they told would be different and would captivate readers both new and old. While not as popular, Wild Half would also act as a hit for the remainder of the 90s. Makuhari would also end up sticking around a while and bring more comedy to the magazine, but it was different enough to stay alongside its many other gag series. Majokko Vivian would also be comedic, but with Hisoka Returns gone, it got to stretch its legs for a while with some of the romantic elements it exhibited. We're then left with B Takuto and psychological profiler Kusanagi Ai as the only real duds here. In retrospect, we know that Jump at this point was relatively okay. Yu-Gi-Oh! Would go on to do wonders for Shonen Jump, especially with its card game. Many of the series from this year would also last a few years, and in the years coming, we would add hit after hit by brand new authors to the magazine, with 1997 having a particular series which feels custom made for Jump and its little pirate themed mascot, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself there. If you acted as if the future doesn't exist though, Jump has just lost 2 of its biggest and most long-running series, and Roku Danashi Blues is wrapping up too. In this context, things are pretty dicey, so the Dark Age moniker I still feel fits. For next year, that will be much harder to argue for, but we'll discuss that when I get around to making the next history video. So please, if you enjoyed this one, stick around, subscribe, and like the video as I will be making more. You can let me know your thoughts on any manga I covered in this video, be they things you've never heard about before, or your feelings on JoJo, Hoshin Engi, or Yu-Gi-Oh! I always like hearing what other people think about these works, and often people will say they grew up with this era of manga, and I think that's only going to get more common as we run through the late 90s, since there's a lot of heavy hitters to come, and a lot of things I think many people will be excited about. If you really enjoy this and value what I make here, please consider joining the Patreon too. Everything helps me a ton and the support I get is super appreciated. There is some bonus stuff available for patrons, which everyone gets no matter what tier you're a part of, like special small extra videos or audio focus stuff. The only exception to this is anyone who joins at the $3 or above tier gets an exclusive little doodle drawn by me to represent themselves in the credits, like the following cool people. Thank you, Trinity, Jade, Kaizuku Gairu, Sorocool Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fake Go, Yellowtail, Lay Slugget, Chris P. Bacon, Joe Henshin, Full Metal, Unquestionable, Yozakura Psycho, Wuzzle, Violent, Cactus, Joni, City Name E, Vina Burrito, Caffeine Dad, Cryonaut, Crash, 41IZ, Hong, Jamie Reynolds, Manu, Pokeemblem, James Miller, Joba Monkey, Just a Virus, Star Sphinx, PK Broly, Fenrir Black, Elijah Espinoza, New Humanoid, Mark Nielsen, Electro Pirate, Jay Vasso, Three Frogs in a Trench Coat, Sir Flash, Gay Shark, Slimy Okra, Giddista, Hilltop, Vaco Draws, Otaku Gamer X, Deadpan, Shy Monkeys, Jonathan Dragonet, John Sanford, Color, Jaime, Strawberry Prosione, Baz, Palette, Ruiner, Juice, TG Talks Manga, Chromie Knox, Eric Gorski, Miss the Shira, Grizz Exploder, Dextora, Enio Showo, Cheese, and Emmy. Thank you all so much for being patrons, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.